If that engine fails, this plane has less than 5 minutes. The woman in seat 22B said it so quietly that nobody heard her except the little boy beside her. He looked up from his headphones, blinking. What? Evelyn Carter didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the left wing outside the window. The vibration had changed. Most people wouldn't notice it. A different pitch in the engine. A small shudder every few seconds. Barely enough to rattle the plastic cup on her tray table. Across the aisle, a businessman in an expensive blue suit laughed into his phone. A flight attendant smiled as she rolled the drink cart forward. Nobody else seemed to notice that something was wrong. Evelyn noticed. She always noticed. 34 years old. Brown hair tied back. Plain gray sweater. White skin gone pale under the cabin lights. She looked like every tired traveler on a late flight from Denver to Dallas. No one would have guessed that her eyes had once learned to read danger before radar ever could. The boy beside her tugged on her sleeve. He couldn't have been older than 8. You think we're gonna crash? He whispered. Evelyn looked at him. For the first time, her expression softened. No, she said quietly. I think we're going to have a problem. That's different. A man in the row ahead turned around with an annoyed look. Lady, maybe don't scare the kid. She nodded once. You're right. Then she looked back toward the wing. 3 seconds later, the engine exploded with a sharp bang that shook the entire plane. The cabin dropped so suddenly that screams ripped through the air. Overhead bins burst open. A woman cried out. Somewhere near the back, glass shattered. Oxygen masks fell from the ceiling in a wave of yellow and white. The businessman across the aisle grabbed his seat with both hands. The little boy froze. Evelyn moved before anyone else did. She pulled his oxygen mask down, tightened the strap behind his head, then reached across the aisle to help an elderly woman whose hands were shaking too badly to move. The flight attendants were yelling now, their voices breaking with panic. Remain seated. Remain seated. But nobody was listening. A man stumbled into the aisle. Another passenger started praying out loud. The plane dropped again, maybe 2,000 feet in less than 10 seconds. Then came the smell. Smoke. Electrical. Faint, but there. Evelyn closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them again, something about her had changed. The fear was still there. It always was. She had simply learned, a long time ago, how to put it somewhere else. She stood. A flight attendant rushed toward her immediately. Young. Nervous. Barely older than 22. Ma'am, you need to sit down right now. Evelyn looked toward the cockpit. Your captain just lost the left engine. The young woman stared at her. How do you know that? Another violent tremor rolled through the cabin. The lights flickered once. Evelyn steadied herself against the seat. Because the vibration changed 30 seconds before it failed. The flight attendant said nothing. Her face lost all color. Then the intercom crackled overhead. The captain's voice came through, strained and tight. Ladies and gentlemen, we've experienced a mechanical issue. Please remain calm. Calm. Evelyn almost smiled. Outside the window, the left engine was dark. No flame now. Just smoke trailing behind the wing against the black sky. Somewhere in the front of the cabin, a baby started crying. The little boy beside her looked up again, his small voice shaking. Are we gonna die? Evelyn looked at him. Then she slowly reached beneath the sleeve of her sweater and adjusted the old silver bracelet hidden on her wrist. Faded letters. Almost worn away. Ghost Falcon. No, she said softly. Not tonight. The plane lurched hard to the left. A wave of gasps rolled through the cabin. One of the overhead lights burst into darkness. Somewhere near the back, someone shouted that there was smoke. Evelyn was already moving. She leaned toward the frightened flight attendant and spoke in a low, steady voice. Listen to me. You need to get everyone away from the left side of the cabin. Keep them calm. Do not let anyone run. The young woman stared at her for one frozen second. Then she nodded. Something in Evelyn's voice left no room to argue. Around them, panic was spreading. Faster than the smoke. A man tried to stand. The plane dropped again, throwing him against the seats. A crying woman clutched her chest. The little boy in 22A grabbed Evelyn's sleeve with both hands. Please do not go. She crouched beside him. I need you to do something important for me. He looked up through tears. What? Stay with your mom. Keep your mask on. You are going to be the brave one now. He nodded slowly. Evelyn touched his shoulder once, then turned toward the front of the plane. Every step down the aisle felt familiar in a way she hated. The smell of burned wiring. The trembling floor under her feet. The desperate noise of people trying not to be afraid. 10 years disappeared in an instant. Different aircraft. Different sky. Same feeling. Halfway to the cockpit, she stopped beside an older man struggling to breathe. His oxygen mask had slipped sideways. His hands were shaking too hard to fix it. Evelyn adjusted the mask, checked his pulse, then glanced at the silver wings pinned to his jacket. Retired Air Force. He looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. How bad is it? She hesitated. Bad enough that the crew needs help. The man's breathing slowed. He studied her face for a second longer. Then his expression changed. Not recognition. Not yet. Just the feeling that he had seen that look before. Near the cockpit door, a flight attendant blocked her path. He was older than the others, maybe 40. His face was pale with fear, but he still tried to sound firm. Ma'am, nobody is allowed up there. Evelyn glanced toward the shaking cockpit door. The intercom crackled again. The captain was breathing hard now. Too hard. We have lost hydraulic pressure. Repeat, we have lost. Static swallowed the rest. Evelyn looked back at the flight attendant. Your pilot is running out of time. Who are you? He asked. She did not answer. Another violent shudder tore through the cabin. The lights went out for 2 long seconds. People screamed in the darkness. When the emergency lights flickered back on, Evelyn had already stepped closer. Open the door. He stared at her. I cannot do that. Her voice stayed quiet, almost gentle. Then in 3 minutes. This plane goes down somewhere over western Kansas. Silence. The man swallowed hard. His hand trembled near the keypad. Finally, he stepped aside. The cockpit door opened. Inside, chaos. Warning lights flashed red across every screen. One pilot was slumped against the side window, holding his shoulder. The captain gripped the controls with white knuckles. Sweat ran down his face. He looked up when Evelyn entered. Who the hell let a passenger in here? Evelyn moved beside him, one hand bracing against the panel as the aircraft shook again. She looked at the instruments for less than 3 seconds. Then she saw it. The altitude dropping. The damaged engine. The dead radio frequency blinking in silence. Her eyes narrowed. You are on the wrong channel, she said quietly. There is still one frequency they will answer. The captain stared at her like she had lost her mind. Red warning lights flashed across the cockpit, bathing his face in broken color. Outside the windshield, there was nothing except black sky and the faint glow of the damaged wing. What frequency? He demanded. Evelyn leaned across the center console. Her fingers moved without hesitation, turning one dial, then another. A number appeared on the screen. Old. Military. Buried so deep in the emergency system that the pilots probably had never noticed it. The younger pilot looked up from the floor, still clutching his shoulder. That channel is restricted. Evelyn's voice stayed calm. Not tonight. The captain hesitated. Who are you? For a second, she did not answer. Her eyes stayed on the radio. Then she pressed the transmit button. Emergency aircraft November 726. Severe engine failure. Loss of hydraulics. Civilian passengers on board. Static answered her. Nothing else. The captain looked at her with growing anger. There is nobody there. Evelyn pressed the button again. This time her hand trembled slightly. Barely enough for anyone else to notice. Ghost Falcon requesting immediate vector and escort. Silence. Complete silence. Even the alarm seemed quieter for 1 long second. Then the radio cracked alive. A man's voice. Deep. Sharp. Unmistakably military. Say again, call sign. The captain froze. The younger pilot looked up in disbelief. Evelyn closed her eyes for the briefest moment. 10 years disappeared. Dust. Fire. A black sky over Syria. The sound of a helicopter going down. Men shouting her name through smoke. She opened her eyes again. Ghost Falcon, she repeated softly. The answer came instantly. My God. Another voice broke in, younger, strained with disbelief. Ghost Falcon, this is Viper Lead. We thought you were dead. The captain stared at her. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Evelyn did not look at him. Outside the cockpit window, 2 distant lights appeared in the darkness. Tiny at first, then growing larger. Fast. Very fast. Within seconds, the sleek shape of 2 F-22 fighters slid into view beside the crippled plane. One on each side. Silent. Perfect. The younger pilot nearly forgot his pain. That is impossible, he whispered. The radio came alive again. Ghost Falcon, this is Colonel Ryan Mercer. I have you on radar. Evelyn went completely still. She knew that voice. Older now. Rougher. Still the same. A long time ago, she had dragged him out of a burning helicopter with one arm after he had lost consciousness. She had not seen him since the day her unit disappeared. "Colonel Mercer," she said quietly. Across the radio, there was silence. Not confusion this time. Something else. Something heavier. "You are alive," he said at last. Evelyn looked out at the fighter jet, pacing them through the dark. Apparently. The colonel exhaled slowly. She could almost hear him remembering. "Listen to me carefully. I am going to get you home." The captain finally found his voice. "Colonel, who is this woman?" There was a pause. Then Ryan Mercer answered with the kind of respect that changed the air in the cockpit. "That woman saved my squadron in Syria. She was Raven Air 9. The younger pilot went pale. Even the captain seemed to stop breathing. Everybody in the Air Force knew that name. Raven Air 9. The unit that officially never existed. The unit that never came back. Evelyn looked down at the faded silver bracelet hidden beneath her sleeve. Ghost Falcon. Almost worn away. Almost forgotten. Almost. For a moment. Nobody in the cockpit spoke. The alarms still screamed. The plane still shook. Yet everything had changed. The captain looked at Evelyn differently now. Not like a passenger. Not like a stranger. He looked at her the way people look at someone who has walked through a storm they cannot imagine. Outside the windshield, the two fighters held their position less than 300 yards away. One off the left wing. One off the right. Their navigation lights flashed against the darkness, steady and calm. The radio crackled again. "Ghost Falcon, your nearest runway is McConnell Air Force Base. 48 miles east. You need to descend now." Evelyn studied the instruments. The damaged engine was still losing power. Hydraulic pressure continued to fall. One more system failure, and they would lose control completely. "We are too high," she said quietly. The captain swallowed. "I know." She looked at him. "No, you do not." Her hand moved across the panel. She adjusted the trim, checked the altitude, then pointed toward a blinking warning on the lower screen. "Your backup hydraulic pump is still working. Barely. You have maybe 90 seconds before it fails." The captain stared at the screen. He had not even seen the warning. Beside him, the younger pilot looked at Evelyn with open disbelief. "How do you know all this?" She did not answer. Because she had sat in another cockpit once. Because years ago she had learned how to keep an aircraft in the air after losing almost everything else. Because there had been 6 people in that helicopter. Because only one of them had come home. The memory hit her without warning. Smoke. Fire. The sharp smell of fuel. Colonel Mercer unconscious beside her. The pilot bleeding from his forehead. Someone in the back whispering, "Do not let us fall." Evelyn pushed the memory away. "Not now." The radio hissed again. "Ghost Falcon, you need to bank 5 degrees starboard. There is weather ahead." Colonel Mercer paused for half a second. Then his voice changed. Softer now. More personal. "Evelyn, stay with me." The captain looked at her sharply. "He knows your first name?" She ignored him. Outside the left window, lightning flashed in the distance. A line of dark clouds stretched across the horizon. Too close. Too fast. The plane lurched again. A warning horn filled the cockpit. The younger pilot grabbed the side of his seat. "We just lost more pressure." The captain's hands began to shake. Evelyn reached over and placed her hand lightly on the controls. Not taking them, just steadying them. "Look at me," she said. He did. "You are going to land this plane." "I cannot." "Yes, you can." Her voice never rose. "Keep your eyes on the horizon. Ignore the alarms. Listen to my voice." For one strange moment, the captain obeyed. The panic in his face eased just enough for him to breathe. Evelyn glanced through the cockpit door. In the cabin beyond, people were still crying. The little boy from seat 22A sat holding his mother's hand. He looked toward the front of the plane, searching for her. Their eyes met for 1 second. She gave him the smallest nod. He nodded back. The radio crackled once more. Colonel Mercer's voice returned, stronger now. "McConnell Tower is ready. Fire crews are standing by. Every runway light is on." He hesitated. Then, very quietly, he said the words nobody had spoken in 10 years. "Raven Air 9, welcome home." The runway lights appeared through the darkness like a string of distant stars. 48 miles had never felt so far. The captain kept both hands locked on the controls. His breathing was still uneven, but he was listening now. Every word Evelyn said, he followed. "Bring the nose down 2 degrees, she said quietly. "Do not fight the aircraft. Let it settle." Outside, The two fighters stayed beside them, cutting through the night with impossible precision. In the cabin, the fear had changed. The screaming was gone. People were still crying. Some were praying. Others sat frozen with their hands wrapped around the oxygen masks. Yet one by one, they had stopped looking at the ceiling. They were looking toward the cockpit, toward the woman who had stood up when everyone else had frozen. The older man with the Air Force wings was still in his seat near the front. He watched Evelyn through the open cockpit door. Suddenly his eyes widened. He stood slowly, gripping the seat in front of him for balance. "No," he whispered. A flight attendant tried to stop him, but he stepped into the aisle anyway. "I know her." Evelyn heard his voice. She turned slightly. The man looked older than before. Gray hair, thin face. The years had changed him. Even so, she recognized him. Major Thomas Hale, retired Air Force rescue pilot. He had been there the night Raven Air 9 disappeared. "You flew the extraction route," he said softly. The entire front of the cabin went quiet. Even the flight attendants stopped moving. Hale stared at her as if he were looking at a ghost. "You were the one who stayed behind." Evelyn looked away. There was no one else. The captain glanced between them. "What is he talking about?" Major Hale swallowed hard. 10 years ago, there was a classified mission over Syria. Her unit got trapped behind enemy lines. We had one helicopter left, one seat open. His voice shook. "She gave it to somebody else." Silence filled the cockpit. Outside, lightning flashed again beyond the clouds. Colonel Mercer's voice returned over the radio. "You are 12 miles out. Runway is clear." Major Hale closed his eyes for a second. "We thought you died out there." Evelyn stared through the windshield. The runway was closer now. Bright. Real. "So did I," she said quietly. The younger pilot looked at her in disbelief. "Why would you stay behind?" She did not answer right away. Her fingers brushed the faded silver bracelet on her wrist. "Ghost Falcon. Almost gone. Almost forgotten." Then she spoke. "Because there were 5 people on that helicopter." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "And there were 6 of us." Nobody in the cockpit said another word. The captain tightened his grip on the controls. The plane shook violently one last time. A warning alarm blared through the cockpit. Hydraulic pressure dropped to almost nothing. The younger pilot looked down in horror. "We just lost the backup pump." The captain's face went white. "I cannot hold her." Evelyn stepped forward instantly. One hand on the console, one hand lightly over his. "Calm. Steady." "Yes, you can," she said. "You only need 30 more seconds." Outside the windshield, the runway lights rushed toward them. The 2 F-22s peeled away into the darkness, their mission finished. Then Colonel Mercer's voice came one last time through the radio, quiet enough that only Evelyn could truly hear it. "You do not stay behind anymore." The wheels hit the runway so hard the entire aircraft shuddered from nose to tail. A scream tore through the cabin. Then came another impact. Louder this time. The damaged plane bounced once, drifted left, then finally settled onto the runway with a long metallic groan. The captain fought the controls with both hands. Evelyn stood beside him, one hand braced against the console, her eyes fixed ahead. "Keep her straight," she said quietly. "Do not touch the brakes yet." Fire trucks raced alongside them, red lights flashing across the cockpit windows. The runway stretched forever in front of them. Then, slowly, impossibly, the aircraft began to slow. The captain pulled in one shaking breath after another. The younger pilot stared out the windshield like he could not believe what he was seeing. Finally, the plane rolled to a stop in the middle of the runway. For 1 second there was nothing. No voices. No movement. Just silence. Then the cabin erupted. People cried, laughed, held each other. A woman dropped to her knees in the aisle. The little boy from seat 22A wrapped his arms around his mother and pointed toward the cockpit. "I told you," he whispered. "She said we were not going to die." Evelyn closed her eyes. Only for a second. The adrenaline was fading now. Her hands finally began to shake. She curled them into fists before anyone could see. Outside the windshield, military vehicles were already racing toward the plane. Black SUVs, fire crews, ambulances. At the front of them all was a dark Air Force truck with its headlights cutting through the night. The captain looked over at her slowly. "You saved every person on this plane." Evelyn shook her head once. "You landed it." He stared at her. Then, very quietly, he said, "No. I just held the controls." The cockpit door opened behind them. Major Hale stood there with tears in his eyes. So did the young flight attendant who had first tried to stop Evelyn in the aisle. Neither of them spoke. They did not have to. Through the window, the door of the lead truck opened. A man stepped out in an Air Force flight suit. Tall, broad shoulders, silver at his temples now. Colonel Ryan Mercer. He stopped beneath the wing and looked up at the cockpit window. Even from 50 yards away, Evelyn could see it in his face. 10 years of questions. 10 years of guilt. 10 years of believing she was gone. Slowly, without taking his eyes off her, he raised his hand in a salute. Perfect. Silent. Outside, every airman near the runway stopped moving. One by one, they followed him. Firefighters, pilots, ground crew. Even the captain beside her stood up from his seat. Then he saluted too. Evelyn looked at them through the glass. All those faces. All that respect. For a moment, she looked very small standing there in her plain gray sweater with her hair falling loose around her shoulders. Nothing about her looked extraordinary, until she returned the salute. Precise, effortless, like she had done it 1,000 times before. Then she lowered her hand, pulled the sleeve of her sweater back over the silver bracelet, and quietly stepped away from the window. The cabin door opened with a hiss. Cold night air rushed inside. Passengers began filing out slowly, wrapped in blankets, holding each other, still trying to understand what had just happened. Some glanced back toward Evelyn as they passed. Others stopped completely. The businessman who had rolled his eyes at her in seat 21C paused in front of her. His expensive suit was wrinkled now. His hand still shook. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I thought you were just—" He stopped. He could not finish the sentence. Evelyn gave him a small nod. "You were scared." He looked down. Somehow that made him feel even worse. Near the front of the plane, the little boy from seat 22A pulled away from his mother and ran back toward her. He still wore the oversized oxygen mask hanging around his neck. In his hand was a small plastic toy airplane. Blue, missing one wing. He held it out to her. "You can have it," he said, "because you saved us." Evelyn looked at the toy for a long second. Then she knelt in front of him. "No," she said softly. "You keep it." He frowned. "Why?" A faint smile touched her face. "The first real one all night. So you remember that being brave does not mean you are not scared." The boy thought about that seriously. Then he nodded. Behind him, his mother wiped tears from her eyes. Outside the aircraft, rows of Air Force personnel stood waiting beneath the floodlights. Nobody spoke as Evelyn stepped down the stairs. Colonel Ryan Mercer was standing at the bottom. Closer now, he looked older than she remembered. More lines around his eyes. More gray in his hair. The years had been heavy on him too. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he spoke. "You disappeared." Evelyn looked past him toward the dark runway. That was the idea. He let out a quiet breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "We searched for 2 years. She finally looked at him. "You should not have." "I know." His voice dropped. "But I did." The silence between them stretched. Around them, dozens of people stood perfectly still, pretending not to watch. Major Hale stood near one of the trucks. The captain, the flight attendants, fire crews, all waiting. Colonel Mercer reached into the pocket of his flight jacket. Slowly he pulled out something small wrapped in cloth. Worn. Faded. He held it out in his hand. Evelyn stared at it without moving. A unit patch. Black background. Silver wings. Raven Air 9. Burned at the edges. She had not seen it in 10 years. "We found it in the wreckage," he said quietly. "I kept it." Her throat tightened. She reached for the patch with careful fingers. Beneath the floodlights, everyone saw it. The old symbol. The name of the unit that had officially never existed. A young airman standing nearby whispered, "I thought Raven Air 9 was just a story." Colonel Mercer looked at him without taking his eyes off Evelyn. "No," he said softly. "She was real." Evelyn held the patch in both hands. The fabric was rough beneath her fingers, burned at the edges, torn near the center where the silver thread had once been brighter. For 10 years she had tried not to think about it. Not to think about the people who had worn that patch beside her. Not to think about the last night. Yet now, standing under the floodlights with the cold Kansas wind moving through her hair, it all came back. Colonel Mercer saw it in her face. "You do not have to say anything," he said quietly. She looked down at the patch again. "There were 6 of us," she said. Nobody moved. The runway had gone completely silent around her. Even the engines of the emergency vehicles seemed farther away now. Evelyn's voice stayed calm, but something inside it had changed. Softer. Older. "We were supposed to get in and out in 20 minutes. A communications tower outside Aleppo. In, out, gone before sunrise. She stared past the floodlights into the darkness beyond the runway. Then everything went wrong. Major Hale lowered his head. He remembered. Colonel Mercer remembered too. The radio failure. The sandstorm. The fire on the landing zone. Evelyn looked at him. You were injured before we even reached the helicopter. He nodded once. Slowly. You carried me. I dragged you, she said quietly. There is a difference. A few of the younger airmen exchanged glances. None of them had ever heard her voice before. Not really. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The helicopter only had room for 5, she continued. The pilot kept shouting that we had to leave. That if we waited one more minute, nobody was getting out. Her hand tightened around the patch. I remember looking at all of them. Ryan, Carter, Miles, Jenkins, Sarah. She stopped for a second when she said the last name. Colonel Mercer saw it immediately. Sarah Bennett, he said softly. Evelyn nodded. She was 26. She used to carry peanut butter crackers in her vest because she hated military food. A few people smiled through tears. Evelyn almost did too. She told me to get on the helicopter. The wind moved across the runway. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed. I told her no. Colonel Mercer closed his eyes. He had heard this story in fragments for years. Rumors, reports, half-finished interviews. Never from her. Never like this. Evelyn looked down at the patch again. She pushed me toward the door anyway. Said somebody had to come home and tell the truth. Her voice nearly broke on. The last word. Nearly. Then she steadied it again. I did not make it onto that helicopter. It lifted off without me. The young airman who had called Raven Air 9 a story looked stunned. Then how did you survive? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she looked up at him. I walked. Nobody spoke. The silence felt enormous. Colonel Mercer stared at her. 10 years. 10 years of carrying the guilt. 10 years of believing she had died because they left her behind. Then, before anyone could say another word, Evelyn carefully folded the patch and slipped it into the pocket of her sweater. The others did not come home, she said softly. So I stopped wearing the uniform. For a long time, nobody said anything. The floodlights hummed softly above the runway. Wind moved across the empty tarmac. Evelyn stood there in her plain gray sweater, one hand resting against the pocket where she had hidden the patch. Around her, soldiers, pilots, firefighters, passengers, all of them watched in silence. Then the little boy from seat 22A stepped away from his mother again. He walked across the runway with the toy airplane still clutched in his hand. One wing, blue paint, cracked near the nose. He stopped in front of Evelyn and looked up at her with the simple seriousness only children have. If you stopped wearing the uniform, he asked quietly, how did they still know who you were? A few people lowered their heads. Colonel Mercer looked away toward the dark sky. Evelyn looked down at the boy. Then slowly, she knelt in front of him. Because some things do not disappear, she said. Not if they mattered. The boy thought about that. Then he nodded once and held out the toy airplane again. This time Evelyn took it. Her fingers closed gently around the broken wing. Thank you, she whispered. Behind her, the captain of the plane stepped forward. He still looked shaken. His tie was gone. His uniform shirt was wrinkled. Yet he stood straighter now than he had before. Ma'am, he said quietly, there are 183 people alive tonight because of you. Evelyn shook her head. Because people stayed calm. Because your crew did not give up. The captain almost smiled. You still do that. She looked at him. Do what? Carry everyone else before yourself. For a second, she did not answer. Then Colonel Mercer walked toward her. In his hand was something small. A black marker. Without a word, he turned and walked to the side of the fire truck parked nearest the plane. Slowly, carefully, he wrote 6 names across the red paint beneath the floodlight. Sarah Bennett, Miles Carter, Daniel Jenkins, Laura Price, Eric Nolan, Evelyn Carter. The airmen around him watched in silence. When he finished, he stepped back. Raven Air 9, he said softly. All